Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Evan Feinman with us today, the Governor's Chief Broadband Advisor, and also with the Tobacco Commission. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Woody. Happy to be here.
The Tobacco Commission has a long and storied history. I think it was created back in the
late 90s.
Mm-hmm. Talk to us about how that all came about.
Sure. So the Tobacco Commission, which is properly named the Tobacco Region Revitalization Commission, came out of the master settlement agreement between the various states' attorneys general and the largest tobacco companies who'd been lying about the health impacts of smoking. Virginia took a portion of that settlement and used it to endow an economic development agency, which is the Tobacco Commission, to focus on rebuilding the economies of southern and southwest Virginia, which had been really seriously impacted by the loss not just of tobacco, but also of textiles, furniture, and the steady decline of the coal industry, which seemed like a very solid foundation for an economy. They didn't do anything wrong. The global macroeconomy changed and really stole thousands of jobs out from under them, tens of thousands of jobs. And so it's been 20 years now, the Commission's operations, and I've got to say, while the Commission has not batted 1,000, particularly in the last several years, it's been a very open and transparent organization that's really made some very high impact investments. And while the mission is not complete, every economy in the footprint is not thriving, many are, and things are looking very bright across southern and southwest Virginia.
So what was the amount of the original settlement and how much money remains?
Well, so the original settlement was actually the settlement amount was this arcane formula based on domestic production apportioned across the various states that had signed on to the agreement. What the Commission did is took that steady stream of revenue and went to the bond market. And actually over the course of two different securitizations wound up with around $1.1 or $1.2 billion, depending on how you value them across those couple of years. And then was spending pretty aggressively, both earnings and principal, for several years. Around 5 years ago, when Governor McAuliffe asked me to take on being the director of the commission, we really started having a focus on fiscal responsibility. And so we're sitting on about $430 million right now, give or take, some accounts receivable and some obligations that we've got headed out the door. And it's my goal, and the commissioners agree with this goal, to get the commission on a true fiscally sustainable footing, so that we can continue to serve the region indefinitely.
So what are some of the programs that you're able to fund through the Tobacco Commission?
So the commission runs 11 different subcommittees, but really they work across 3 different areas. First, the commission invests in what you would term kind of classic economic development. That's working with corporate leaders and other state incentive programs to try to bring businesses to the region that are not currently located, or to expand businesses within the footprint so they can hire more folks and invest more capital. That's classic kind of what can we do financially to make it more viable for you to do business in this part of the world. The second big area in which the commission works is infrastructure, and so that takes a lot of different forms. That can be broadband funding, that can be industrial site development, that can be shell buildings, that can be very occasionally a gas or a sewer line, or helping to relocate a road. And then the third big area, and this is actually the largest single area of the Commission's budget in any given year, is workforce development. And so really significant investments made both to reduce the cost of credential attainment, to improve the quality, the education and skill level of the workforce that exists in the footprint, and then also to be a source of capital for our post-secondary institutions. Rather than force a community college, for example, to save pennies here or there or run a very high effort capital campaign, if they want to stand up a new nursing program and they need $100,000 or $200,000 worth of equipment to do that, they can come to the commission and we can be a source of that capital so they can get that program stood up inside of a year rather than having to go many years and save up their pennies so they're able to do that. So we're proud of all those different areas of work, and we've moved the needle in each one of them.
So what are some of the community colleges that you work with in your footprint?
Oh, sure. Southside Community College, Danville Community College, Mountain Empire Community College, Patrick Henry Community College. I'm leaving folks out, so I'm going to stop. But I'm going to stop the list there before we go too far. We also work with the higher ed centers, Southern Virginia, Southwest Virginia, the New College Institute, which is kind of its own animal. But any of the community colleges whose catchment area includes our footprint, we work with them, even those that are only partially in the footprint. And so in any given year, we've been spending a significant portion of money just buying down the cost of tuition, really acting as a plus on top of financial aid awards. But we're very curious to see what happens with the General Assembly's actions this year, in which they're going to be, it looks like, dramatically reducing or eliminating community college costs for certain STEM and other fields. And so we want to be nimble and be responsive to those changes as well.
So is Southern Virginia and Southwest Virginia still having difficulties in retaining young people?
Significant difficulties, yes. Things are improving, but I think the best example is if you go to a county board or a city council meeting, it's not a young room. And that's worrisome, because you think, well, these folks who are continuing to be civic actors and leaders in their community are wonderful, and we certainly don't want any of them to make the decision to retire, because we're not sure who's coming behind them. And so one of the things that we're working on that we're actually really proud of has been our talent attraction program. So the Tobacco Commission right now is willing, if you have graduated with a 4-year degree or beyond and are willing to come live and work in the footprint in a high demand field, and that really generally is a wide variety of healthcare professions, a wide variety of IT professions, a couple of different engineering roles, as well as certain basically STEM education and special education, then we'll actually pay up to $12,000 a year of your student loan debt. An additional requirement for that, though, is civic engagement. And we don't prescribe what that civic engagement has to look like. You can coach Little League, you can run for county board, you can join the Rotary Club, but we want you engaged in your community. It's not enough. The Southside and Southwest need leaders, and so what we want folks to do is come participate in their professional life and also their civic and social life in the footprint. And we're really excited about that program. We had extraordinary performance figures for our pilot program that we just finished running, and the applications are open now. So we encourage people to go to our website, Revitalize Virginia, which is spelled revitalizeva.org, and check it out and see if they're interested in coming and putting their shoulders to the wheel in Southern and Southwest Virginia.
Now, I believe the state unemployment rate is about 2.6%.
Quite low, yeah.
Yeah. How does your footprint compare to that?
Similarly, so many of our footprint localities are at or below 4% unemployment, which I always heard in macroeconomics was full unemployment. It was full employment. Certainly, if you're still looking for work, it doesn't feel like full employment. We also are continuing to struggle across the footprint with a challenge that the national economy faces, which is that many of our residents are underemployed. So they may be working, they may be bringing home a paycheck, which is very good, but they're probably not doing what they'd like to be doing or seeing a pathway toward kind of upward mobility for their work.
Any potential for relationship with Amazon that's up in Northern Virginia?
Absolutely. We're working closely with Amazon on a wide variety of things. They're going to wind up locating some remote work in our part of the world, and we're also working with them on some innovative credentialing classes that they may be able to offer in some of our footprint post-secondary institutions. I'm anticipating them asking us for some financial support to make that work, and those decisions would be made in our May meeting.
What about agribusiness? Mm-hmm. Your footprint is largely rural, is it not?
It is largely rural. And agribusiness remains the largest industry in our footprint, and in fact, in Virginia, I think a lot of people are surprised by that, but the agriculture industry is more than a $71 billion per year contributor to gross state product. No other industry in Virginia is above 30, so it remains far and away the largest industry statewide and in our footprint. And the commission works as often as possible to support that, whether it's cost share programs with different producers, value-added processing, toasting barley, those sorts of things. We're working a lot with this boom crop in hemp right now. We have some concerns about the volatility of that market, but we anticipate taking on some hemp processing applications in the forthcoming months.
What about, are there export opportunities for agribusiness out of the Port of Virginia, for example?
Absolutely. We don't directly work on that. We leave that to the port to run their own incentives, but we do know that a significant percentage of the crop produced in our footprint goes out through the Port of Virginia to other countries, and we love that. If we can have labor and small amounts of capital be put to work in Virginia and have that turn into lots of capital coming from elsewhere into Southern Virginia or Southwest Virginia, that's something we're excited to see every time.
Talk to us a little bit more about the Regional Opportunity Fund and what it's used for.
Sure. Well, so we offer the Tobacco Region Opportunity Fund grants and loans to any business that is looking to move into our footprint, is in a competitive posture. So it is an incentive. So we don't want to. You're not incenting behavior if it's simply behavior that people are already going to undertake. But if it's truly a situation in which a company is looking broadly at where and whether to expand, and we can help our communities be more competitive, we offer grants and loans based on the number of jobs they're going to create, the amount above the prevailing average wage that they will be paying. We do not offer incentives to organizations that are paying below the prevailing wage in a given locality, and how much taxable capital they're willing to put into our communities, because of course the machinery and tools tax is a huge driver of local budgets, and we want to make sure that we're incenting the companies that are going to help benefit our local budgets.
Now, what impact, if any, will the move to raise the minimum wage have on your communities?
Well, opinions differ. I think certainly the prevailing wage in many of our rural, lower income communities is significantly lower than the proposed final outcome of this minimum wage legislation, which would get us to $15. I think the argument that ultimately by putting more money in consumers and wage earning folks' pockets, that you'll increase the velocity of money in the region and lead to greater prosperity is one that makes a lot of sense. I would have some concerns about incredibly rapid implementation of the move from where the wage is now to $15, but I think we'll be able to sort that out. And as I've watched that conversation move through the General Assembly, and certainly you see what the governor is talking about, I think what we'll ultimately arrive at is something that will work for all of Virginia, and that's going to wind up putting more money in working people's pockets, which at the end of the day makes us all better off.
Now, you talked about husbanding the financial resources you have. Mm-hmm. Is there a finite limit to those resources? There
is. So the amount of money that we've got in the bank right now, that $430 million, is all the commission has and all the commission will ever have unless we earn more money on it. And so first, we've been focused on how we can increase our investment earnings. Second, we've been focused on how we might be able to improve our lending activity, both because you get your principal back when you make a loan and because you can charge a little interest there. We do want to stay where we're in competition with the banking industry. We want to make sure that we remain a more attractive opportunity than commercial banking. And then we also are looking at how we might be able to play a little defense and minimize our outlays. And so we have, via our most recent strategic plan, adopted a principle that we won't undertake more than a 4.4% invasion of our principal for any given budget year. And then we want to make sure that the majority of that money is lent out as opposed to is granted out.
There was a recent announcement out of Franklin County, a company called Traditional Medicinals, mm-hmm. I believe. Talk to us about that. That's another success story.
Well, so we've got a variety of them. My view is if you're selling a product people are interested in, I want to help you do it. And so we were able to offer them some capital so that they could set up their operations in our part of the world, and we're excited to see it happen. We were able to we always sign a performance agreement with our grantees that focus on those three metrics that we talked about. So taxable capital incentive, number of jobs created, and the wages produced by those jobs. And provided they meet all of the incentives that they promised to meet, then they'll be able to collect all of that grant and loan incentive. If they're not able to, we'll claw some back. But what we've seen across the entire footprint is that hiring is up, the amount of capital flowing into the region is up, and we're very pleased to see companies like Traditional Medicinals or any of the other, the wide variety of companies, Morgan Olson, that we, Kyocera, that we've brought into the footprint be successful.
Traditional Medicinals, I believe, is an herbal tea operation. What are some of the others you just discussed?
It runs the gamut, honestly. It's really, we've done tool making and coatings companies. We've done a company that makes bulletproof glass for military applications. We've done companies that make truck bodies. We've done companies that do a wide variety of different engineering type operations, whether it's logistical engineering, structural engineering. We've done food distribution for major food retailers. We've done mattress making. We brought Tempur-Pedic's first facility in North America to Southwest Virginia. We've done timber products. We're very happy to support stave mills and cooperages. I'm a whiskey drinker myself and certainly want to support anybody who's making barrels to put more of that sweet stuff in. And at the end of the day, what we really look for is it competitive? Is it going to drive the average wage up in our community? And is it going to be a positive contributor to our tax base? And what we find is that across all of those different industries, they're bringing new capital to the region, and that's what we want to see happen.
So does that include tourism, for example?
We have supported some tourism type operations. That's more on the grant side. And so, for example, the Barter Theater, which is the state's performing arts center, we've grant supported them. The Birthplace of Country Music Museum in Bristol, which is fantastic. I recommend people check it out. Has been a grant supported project. We've also supported some of our trail systems. The Moton Museum in Farmville, another amazing Virginia story that we don't tell enough about. Moton School was actually where Barbara Johns, who's a real civil rights hero, led the initial walkout that ultimately was a part of getting us Brown v. Board of Education. So there's a museum facility there that we've supported. So all of those are great tourist attractions. The Civil War Museum in Appomattox, obviously, that's where it all came to a close. Those are the sorts of operations where it's a little different. It's not somebody in the footprint making a product and selling it in exchange for capital. But tourists are great sources of capital. The really nice thing is they come, they show up, they participate in the local economy, and they leave without asking for too many services. So from an economic impact standpoint, tourists are pretty great.
Now, how do these companies come to your attention? What's the process?
There are a couple of different ways. Some reach out to us directly, and we actually also fund a couple of foreign direct investment organizations, Invest Southern Virginia and Invest Southwest Virginia. They're out there beating the bushes for leads as much as they can. We also, I would say, the largest corridor of folks to us are actually the local economic developers or regional economic developers who are constantly on the hunt for projects, will identify a project and then let us know about it. And then also a sister agency of ours, VEDP, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, is a great source of leads for our part of the Commonwealth as well as the rest of Virginia.
Now, do you provide any support or expertise to local governments, be they cities or counties?
We do. I wouldn't call it regular or routine, but with some frequency, particularly some of our smaller county governments will reach out to us and say, hey, we're working on this project, what do you think? Or we're considering this sort of investment. I've got a really talented staff at the commission, and they have spent years, in some instances decades, working on the economics of the region. And so we've seen a lot of things happen. And so if something seems too good to be true in general, it is. I think that's true in all walks of life. And so often will be a good opportunity for a local government to kind of take take the temperature of a project with a set of outside eyes and see if something really makes sense. We also do some diligence on projects before we dive all the way in. And so somebody may have a too good to be true deal, and every once in a while that really happens, but I'd say by and large, we wind up playing a role of throwing a little cold water on projects, which is not the worst thing in the world, because we do want to be risk averse within sensible margins.
Do you help them with vetting consultants? I'm sure there are a lot of consultants out there.
There are. If they're going to spend their own resources on it, we don't usually get involved. If they're asking us to fund a consultancy, then obviously we kick the tires pretty aggressively. In general, that's not the sort of thing we'd wind up funding.
Let's talk about your role as Chief Broadband Advisor, and I know there's a different website for that as well.
So we've got, if you're interested in the commission, there's the revitalizeva.org website that we talked about. We also, in support of the Governor's Broadband Initiative, we encourage folks to go to commonwealthconnect.virginia.gov, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Really, I'm wearing a second hat there, and so it is important to recognize that the two roles are different. They very theoretically occupy two different FTEs in the state budget.
Full-time equivalent.
Full-time, yes. Apologies. The governor in early 2018 asked if I would take on the role of being his chief broadband advisor, and set a very aggressive goal. He said, actually by summer of 2018, he said we're going to get universal broadband coverage in Virginia in no more than 10 years.
What does that term mean, universal broadband coverage?
Well, so great question. Well, I don't want to leave out the no more than 10 years, because the Gov is very quick to point out that if we get the job done on day 364 of year 9, that's a D-. It's the minimally successful approach, and so we are trying to go faster. Universal coverage, we technically use the term functionally universal coverage. There is a recognition that not every structure in the Commonwealth will be able to get connected. And in fact, if you've built yourself a hunting cabin way up in Northwest Highland County, we're going to respect what brought you out there. We're not necessarily going to spend millions of dollars to get the opportunity to get online to that one building. But most Virginians, the vast majority of Virginians, should have the opportunity to pick up the phone and contact a broadband provider, maybe one of the great VCTA members, maybe a different provider, and get their house online at good, high-quality speeds. We don't support a build for anything less than 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. And what I would say is that the vast majority of the projects we fund are actually significantly higher speed than that. Ultimately, what we need to do is make sure that every Virginian has at least one option to get online. That's not saying you have to take the service. That's not saying the Commonwealth is going to pick up the tab for the service. But what we are saying is the hundreds of thousands of Virginians that right now simply can't get on the internet at a speed that's worth using right now need to get that service. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. The first and the reason there's really strong overlap with my Tobacco Commission work is economic. The simple fact is, when I'm talking to a corporate leader, if there is not broadly available broadband at not just the place of business, but also at the residences surrounding the place of business, that community is off the list. People will not move a business to a community that's not online. And that makes a lot of sense. Second, there's a political and a social demand for it. The fact is, folks who don't have access to the internet right now want it. And it's easy to say dismissive things, like, they just want to watch Netflix. And one, I think that dismissiveness is wrong. If the majority of Americans' shared cultural experience is going to be via these streaming services, it's not frivolous for other Americans, those Americans that are sitting on the sidelines, to want to be a part of that process. But I also think there's a much deeper argument for it. There's the economic argument for it. And then there's the final argument that is really speaks to me, which is I believe we have a moral and an ethical obligation to make service available to everyone. When you look at the most vulnerable communities in Virginia, you look at the elderly who, without broadband connectivity, will not be able to age in place safely. You look at our children, who we know that even when you do good statistical analysis, you back out the education and affluence of the parents, the quality of the K-12 system, kids who grow up in a household without access to broadband internet do worse in their post-secondary outcomes than they do otherwise. And then finally, there's a tremendous need for telehealth services, and in particular, among our veterans community, for telepsychiatry. We know that rural communities are overrepresented in our armed services, and when those guys and women go back to their hometowns, they are often in serious need of psychiatric services. The availability of those services in rural towns is spotty, if it exists at all, and access to telepsychiatry could really and truly save a whole lot of lives. And these are folks who've done an awful lot for the rest of us, and I think we owe it to make this service available to them.
So what are some of the funding options available for local communities?
Sure. Well, the primary funding option is the VADI program, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. And so again, if people head to commonwealthconnect.virginia.gov, You can pull down a tab and see what the funding options are across a variety of state and federal programs, but the core program is that VODI program, and that's a program that makes grants to public-private partnerships, so partnerships between a unit of local government or local governments and an internet service provider or internet service providers. The metric by which we evaluate whether or not somebody ought to get grant funding is the efficiency by which they're connecting Virginians. That's a directive that we've gotten from the General Assembly and frankly is good sense and what we'd be doing anyway. So we look at what are the number of people who can get connected per state dollar that's requested, and we rank our different projects, and then we try to support those projects that are getting the most Virginians online the most speedily. That has been really effective, and in fact we're very proud. We're running that program really efficiently. We've gotten right around 108,000 Virginians connected for a relatively small deployment of funds. By comparison, federal programs that have similar goals are running at about 5 times more expensive on a per connection basis, and where projects that we fund get completed in a year, the federal government gives you 6 years to get that project done.
Is wireless a potential opportunity?
Absolutely. The two kinds of technologies that we fund via the VODI program, in general, are fiber to the home, which is exactly what it sounds like. You get a fiber optic cable and you get it to your structure, or fixed wireless. It is important to note that fixed wireless is distinct from mobile or cellular wireless services. In a fixed wireless situation, you've got an antenna on a structure, because when transmitters and receivers know where each other are and can do direct line of sight communication or even through some foliage, you can get a much more robust signal. And that allows us to do much higher speeds.
That's as opposed to going through a cell tower and then to another
Well, these
site.
are often on towers. So what you've got is you got your transmitters on a tower and they're going to a structure, but it's simply not to a mobile device. The speeds that you get with mobile tend to be much lower, and there's often data caps on people's plans, whereas a fixed wireless program generally doesn't have those data
Are there
caps.
any current programs that impact low-income people, for example?
So we're working a lot on the affordability question from a policy standpoint, and that's a challenge. I don't want to undersell how difficult it is to come up with good policy solutions to that. Many of the large telecom companies, though, have really strong programs. I know that Cox and Comcast in Virginia, and I believe Charter, all offer very low-cost programs to subscribers who have kids on free or reduced lunch, and then there's some other eligibility, whether it's, some have veterans eligibility, some have disability type eligibility, but those are really good programs, and we encourage folks to take advantage of them and inquire as to whether or not their current ISP has low-income support. We also are working here in the General Assembly on some approaches that may bring us some lower cost service, but I'm not quite ready to announce those programs here on the show today.
Well, once again, thank you for being here. What are those websites, the Tobacco
Absolutely.
Commission?
If you're interested in doing business in Southern and Southwest Virginia, or you want us to support you come to the region, go to revitalizeva.org. We're very excited for folks to do that. And if you want to learn more, or you're a local leader, please go to commonwealthconnect.virginia.gov. We have an entire step-by-step guide and toolkit that can help anybody who wants to get their community online from wherever they are to the finish line.
Evan Feinman, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Woody. I really had fun.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association. Until next time, I am Woody Evans.